Lesson 66. My happiness and my function are one. You have surely noticed an emphasis throughout our recent lessons on the connection between fulfilling your function and achieving happiness. This is because you do not really see the connection. Yet there is more than just a connection between them. They are the same. Their forms are different, but their content is completely one. The ego does constant battle with the Holy Spirit on the fundamental question of what your function is. So does it do constant battle with the Holy Spirit about what your happiness is? It is not a two-way battle. The ego attacks, and the Holy Spirit does not respond. He knows what your function is. He knows that it is your happiness. Today we will try to go past this wholly meaningless battle and arrive at the truth about your function. We will not engage in senseless arguments about what it is. We will not become hopelessly involved in defining happiness and determining the means for achieving it. We will not indulge the ego by listening to its attacks on truth. 5. We will merely be glad that we can find out what truth is. Our longer practice period today has as its purpose your acceptance of the fact that not only is there a very real connection between the function God gave you and your happiness, but that they are actually identical. God gives you only happiness. Therefore, the function He gave you must be happiness, even if it appears to be different. Today's exercises are an attempt to go beyond these differences in appearance and recognize a common content where it exists in truth. Begin the 10 to 15-minute practice period by reviewing these thoughts. God gives me only happiness. He has given my function to me. Therefore, my function must be happiness. Try to see the logic in this sequence, even if you do not yet accept the conclusion. It is only if the first two thoughts are wrong that the conclusion could be false. Let us, then, think about the premises for a while, as we are practicing. The first premise is that God gives you only happiness. This could be false, of course, but in order to be false, it is necessary to define God as something He is not. Love cannot give evil, and what is not happiness is evil. God cannot give what He does not have, and He cannot have what He is not. Unless God gives you only happiness, He must be evil. And it is this definition of Him you are believing if you do not accept the first premise. The second premise is that God has given you your function. We have seen that there are only two parts of your mind. One is ruled by the ego and is made up of illusions. The other is the home of the Holy Spirit, where truth abides. There are no other guides but these to choose between, and no other outcomes possible as a result of your choice but the fear that the ego always engenders and the love that the Holy Spirit always offers to replace it. Thus, it must be that your function is established by God through His voice, or is made by the ego which you have made to replace Him, which is true. Unless God gave your function to you, it must be the gift of the ego. Does the ego really have gifts to give, being itself an illusion and offering only the illusion of gifts? Think about this during the longer practice period today. Think also about the many forms the illusion of your function has taken in your mind, and the many ways in which you tried to find salvation under the ego's guidance. Did you find it? Were you happy? Did they bring you peace? We need great honesty today. Remember the outcomes fairly, and consider also whether it was ever reasonable to expect happiness from anything the ego ever proposed. Yet the ego is the only alternative to the Holy Spirit's voice. You will listen to madness or hear the truth. Try to make this choice as you think about the premises on which our conclusion rests. We can share in this conclusion but in no other, for God Himself shares it with us. Today's idea is another giant stride in the perception of the same as the same, and the different as different. On one side stand all illusions, all truth stands on the other. Let us try today to realize that only the truth is true. In the shorter practice periods, which would be most helpful today if undertaken twice an hour, this form of the application is suggested. My happiness and function are one because God has given me both. It will not take more than a minute, and probably less, to repeat these words slowly and think about them a little while as you say them. Lesson 66. My happiness and my function are one. A deep exploration of the fireside chat. This one is a big one, a game changer, a fundamental reset of how we think about happiness and purpose. It's not two things. It's not multiple paths, not layered priorities. It's one. And the Course doesn't leave room for debate here. It's laying down an absolute. The kind of truth that, once accepted, leaves no wiggle room. Your happiness and your function are the same. Not connected, not parallel, not aligned, the same. And if that's the case, what does that mean about everything you've been taught about happiness? About function? About purpose? Let's break it all the way down. The illusion of separation. Why we think happiness and function are two different things. We live in a world that teaches compartmentalization, separating our lives into different categories, different goals, different needs. You've got your personal life, your work life, your relationships, your spiritual path, your dreams, your obligations, and we've been conditioned to believe that happiness is this thing you get after you accomplish your function. You work, then you get to be happy. You sacrifice, then you get rewarded. You hustle, then you earn peace. You build the perfect life, then joy arrives. The Course is saying, false. Happiness is not a reward. Happiness is the function itself. And yet, we don't see this because we are trained to believe in form over content. Form says, happiness is when I have X, Y, or Z. Content says, happiness is a state of being that exists beyond form. The ego is obsessed with form, what it looks like. That's why it constantly fights with the Holy Spirit over what your function is, because your function does not look like what the world has told you. The ego wants happiness to be conditional, something you achieve once certain external conditions are met. The Holy Spirit is saying, no, happiness is your function right now, because your function is extending love, seeing innocence, recognizing truth, not later, not when you've made it. Now the ego's fake definition of function and how it tricks you. The Course makes it clear that the ego has a completely different definition of function than the Holy Spirit. And the ego is loud, persistent. It's been running the show for a long time, so of course it feels normal. So, what does the ego say your function is? Get money, find security, achieve, win, prove yourself, be successful, look good, control how people see you, make sure people respect you, make sure you're not left out, make sure you don't lose. Sounds familiar, right? This is the framework that most of the world runs on. Now, let's get real. The Holy Spirit is not trying to take away your money, your success, or your achievements. That's not the point. The point is that these things were never your function, and when you mistake them for your function, you suffer, you chase them, you get them, and then what? That moment of I finally made it is always temporary because the ego moves the goalposts. The ego will never let you arrive at happiness because its entire existence depends on conflict. The ego needs conflict to exist. The Holy Spirit doesn't even respond. This is a crucial point. The ego thrives on battle. It needs something to push against, something to overcome, something to fight, something to prove. It constantly tells you that your happiness is just beyond where you are. But here's the Course's mic drop moment. The Holy Spirit does not respond. There is no battle because the Holy Spirit isn't even playing the game. How can there be a fight if only one side is swinging? Imagine throwing a punch at thin air. The ego is like a shadowboxing champion, fighting itself, throwing punches at illusions, exhausting itself. Meanwhile, the Holy Spirit stands in peace, knowing what is true. So when the ego screams, "But I need to do all this to be happy," the Holy Spirit simply remains in truth. Your happiness and your function are already one. The first premise: God gives you only happiness. Here's where the Course pulls out the biggest spiritual sledgehammer. If God is love, he cannot give evil. Read that again. Love cannot give evil. That means if you believe that God has given you suffering, you are defining God as something he is not. If you believe that pain, loss, struggle, and sacrifice are God's will, you are defining God as something he is not. If you believe that God created a world where you have to earn happiness, you are defining God as something he is not. Love cannot give what it does not have. If God is only love, and love is only happiness, then God only gives happiness. Period. And if that's true, then the function he gave you must be happiness. The second premise: God has given you your function. This is where the Course demolishes the idea that you need to figure out your purpose. Your purpose was given to you. It's already in place. You don't need to search for it, find it, earn it, or decode it. And here's the truth. If you believe otherwise, then you believe the ego created your purpose. But can an illusion give you anything real? No way, Jose. The ego is built on fear, conflict, and separation. It can only create more fear, conflict, and separation. It cannot give what it does not have. The Holy Spirit, on the other hand, simply reminds you of what's already true. Your function is love. Your function is happiness. Your function is extending truth, not later. Now, the final thought. The truth is always the same. Illusions are always different. This is why truth is simple. Truth is the same today, tomorrow, and forever. Illusions are always shifting. Just look at the world. What was popular last year is outdated today. What seemed like the path to happiness 5 years ago now feels empty. The goalposts are always moving, because the ego's promises are built on form, and form always changes. But truth is stable. Truth is unchanging, and here's the truth. Your happiness and your function are one. The ego will try to complicate this. The world will try to sell you a different version. But at the core, it's this simple. You were created in love. You were created to extend love. Love is happiness. Therefore, your function is happiness, not later. Not when conditions are right. Not after you fix everything in your life. Right now. And that's the doozy.